what we see around us, we don't believe that because we want to buy into standards.
We have to prove that we're good fathers. When, as far as the mothers, it's just assumed.
So I'll wait on the check. I'll keep my self-respect first.
I'm a black man trying to save a black man, and I noticed as I looked around the whole room, there's no one helping me.
The reality is, if it affects you, it affects me.
Welcome to Like It Is. I am your host, Eunice Smith-Clark. Today, we're discussing PTSS, post-traumatic slavery syndrome. What is PTSS? How does it influence us as a community and as individuals? To answer those questions and to enlighten us more on this invisible mental stronghold suffocating the Black community is attorney at law, Theresa Brunson, CEO of the Black Male Community Council of Philadephia, Mr. Stanley Crawford, and licensed therapist and founder of Black Men Heal, a program helping Black men overcome psychological effects of PTSS, is Tasnim Suleiman. Welcome and thank you all for being a part of this conversation, this much needed conversation. So to begin, please, can someone help to break down just a little bit and elaborate on PTSS, post-traumatic slavery syndrome? Tasnim, I know you and I in the past have had many conversations about this, and I think that with this movement of the Black therapeutic or healing movement has helped to enlighten people and open up the minds of people to even understand the awareness of some of the things that we've been suffering with for generations.
The PTSS, I mean, it's a play off what post-traumatic stress syndrome is the clinical term, which is like you go through a trauma which is a horrible experience, something that threatens your sense of existence, survival. It threatens the part of your brain, the threat center of your brain. And it's a horrible experience that keeps replaying, and it keeps replaying in your mind. That's the post-traumatic stress syndrome. And then, like us as people of color, the term was coined post-traumatic slave syndrome as well. And I think that, I can't remember maybe one of you guys know, I just did a presentation recently with the name of the person who coined that term. But post-traumatic slave syndrome is like what we, as being ancestors of slaves, have went through, being that none of us directly have perhaps have been slaves, but that we have all experienced the intergenerational traumatic effects of what slavery, racism, and oppression has done, and that we're still dealing with that, the effects of that psychologically. I mean, we really dealing with it right now in 2020. It's like, nobody could deny it. It's like real blatant right now. So that's what PTSS is.
Absolutely.
Dr. Joy DeGruy wrote the book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Dr. Naeem Akbar wrote Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. And one of my premises is, we are sick people under the illusion that we are well. And those who think they are the wellest is the sickest. Because you cannot have our experience as human beings and wake up or look in the mirror and say that we are not affected by what is in our genealogy and what is in our DNA. I'll give you an example. I'm 68 years old. I remember back when I was wearing processors. Why was I wearing processors? Because I was trying to imitate the slave master. And when we look back into a lot of things that we do as what I call kidnapped Africans, that's another thing that I'd like to point, because we was kidnapped from Africa, stolen and brought here for the purpose of slavery and nothing else. And that kidnapping have not stopped even to this very day, because we haven't been given the option to be able to make a decision for ourselves as a people or go back to where we came from. And so therefore we are still in the throes of the effect of slavery. I was born in 1952. That means I was born 87 years after the slave experience. So for me to walk around and say that's still not affecting me or haven't been affecting me, that's what I say we are sick people under the illusion that we are well.
When it comes to beatings and spanking and how we reprimand and discipline our children, you know, just my observation, you know, I notice other cultures, they're, sometimes I witnessed a little girl yesterday, and, you know, the tantrum that she had, and as we were sitting around, our response was, she needs somebody, they need to beat her, right? Now, is that a syndrome? You know, the psychological syndrome that we have because it's been implanted and instilled in us because that's how we were disciplined, you know, as children when we did certain things.
Now they say Willie Lynch wasn't a real person, but the context and the contents of the Willie Lynch letter sort of speaks to what you're speaking to as a way of infusing fear into our ancestors. The whip was used. That's not disputable. Mm-hmm. And I believe, again, like you're saying, we picked that up as a way of infusing fear or what we call discipline into our children. So it could be an offshoot of that way of what we call disciplining our children.
Miss Brunson or Tasman?
Well, I think going into a legal perspective with this, I think that when you make the comparison of this to PTSD, I think, you know, maybe some people could bring it up in court, maybe when they're being sentenced for something as an explanation. I guess if it was listed in the DMSR, is that the name of the book that?
The DSM-5, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Is it listed in there, or is it accepted as
PTSD, yes. PTSS, right. No.
No?
Yeah.
See, that's one thing that I need more information about. PTSS is something that's being spoken of, but is that something that someone can get diagnosed with?
Well, I mean, that's actually a good point. It's spoken of, but like technically our diagnoses from a clinical perspective come from the DSM-5. So it is not, it is not approved as like a clinical diagnosis. It's something that was, you know, the historians that we've talked about, but no, it can't be like a technical diagnosis.
But it would still fall under the classification of PTSD, would it not?
Well, you could talk about PTSD, yes, like that's what it would be like as a clinical terminology, but they haven't, which is actually a very interesting discussion because I'm thinking about it from a clinical perspective, like, yeah, why haven't we kind of fought to get that as an actual diagnosis? 2020, I think, is like enough of evidence-based to fight for the diagnosis to make it a clinical one. So it is a very interesting perspective. The way that trauma is passed down, it's a very, very powerful thing that you don't even have to be directly related, or I'm sorry, not directly related, directly connected to. I've had some of the most unbelievable stories of how, you know, like DNA passes on through, what's the saying, when you pass the wound through the womb, but it's so powerful that I've seen instances. I've done therapy with this guy once who was, I think he was like in his 40s, had never even had a relationship with his father, never even knew his father, never had a relationship with his father, and he had 5 kids, 4 or 5 different women. He was a truck driver. He ended up finding out who his father was, right? His father had 5 kids by 5 different women, had been a truck driver. His grandfather had 5 kids, different women. I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. Like, I'm like, you know, I'm done with coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence, but that's just an example of how powerful history is. Like, typically family history repeats itself unless I'm gonna break the cycle. Right. And the only way you really can break a cycle of passing down intergenerational trauma is through healing. And so the person who heals themselves is the person who frees themselves. And the reason why trauma, when it's passed down, why it affects it affects everything, because it's going to affect your lens. It's going to affect the way in which you connect to the world and to people and to other relationships, like the triggers that happen. But it affects something that happens in relationship forming and bonding, which is called your attachment style, the way in which we form attachments to other, well, when we're babies, we do it with our caregivers, right? And attachment style is crucial, because that is how you feel secure about relationship. Like, do I feel safe? Do I feel seen? Do I feel heard? Do I feel validated? Do I feel loved? Is there a sense of security here, right? And so when people have been traumatized, it affects their ability to form healthy levels of secure attachment with their children or with their partners when it's unhealed trauma. Because there's a part of you that is always so guarded. Again, that's always in that part of the brain that is in survival mode, that you can't truly get close to people. You can't really truly be vulnerable with people. You can't be intimate, like seeing within somebody.
You just gave the most excellent scenario of what's occurring in our post-traumatic slave syndrome, and that was excellent. You didn't,
Absolutely.
We could have stopped right there, because you just put it all out there, right there. On that.
Stop the mic moment, huh? Right.
Absolutely. But if you could just go just another layer deeper in how the reactions now, those triggers that you talked about, and how now people are kind of acting out and in a way that's causing all of this crime, right? Because, you know, of the lack of healing, or, you know.
So this is how deep it is and why it all connects and correlates to like behaviors and impulsive behaviors. So when there is traumas, there will be lots and lots of triggers, right? Meaning that you won't even, and you know what, and that just came to me. I'm like, I got to write that.
Yes.
You're going to constantly be getting triggers when you're when there's unhealed trauma. And here's the thing, those triggers, it could be like, you know, especially in relationship, like you could be like walking to the you know, you could be doing something, you'd be like, wait, all of a sudden your partner is real like, oh, I can't believe you did that. You're like, what, I was just going to the fridge to go. Yeah, but you didn't care about me and blah, blah. We don't even know that we've triggered people's triggers sometimes, because we're not meaning to, because we don't know their stuff, right?
Because people don't know their triggers.
People don't really know their triggers. Their levels of reactivity is so high, right? That's how you know when what I call it is disproportionate reactivity, is when you have like trigger somebody. But when there is a trigger, there is a thought that goes along with that trigger. And with that thought, we tell ourselves a story. Like, oh, wait, this person, like we were using that example earlier, somebody, you know, oh, somebody looking at me the wrong way, somebody step on my foot or whatever. And you like, yo, the trigger, the reactivity, because trauma lives in the body. It lives in our nervous system. So once we're triggered, our entire chemicals in our body is like tensing up into that guard, right? And once that happens, we tell ourselves a story, because once the body tenses up, the brain's job is always trying to protect us from harm. Then the brain tells a story. Oh, wait, yeah, this person is trying to hurt you, right? So just from a thought, which is irrational, it can be a distorted thought. We fall into these thought traps, I call them, or thought distortions, where we see something and like we catastrophize it. Oh, that person did this because they trying to do this, right? And it may not be the case at all. Oftentimes when there is a trigger, it is oftentimes a distortion, a distorted thought that we tell ourselves, that this person is out to get me, this person is doing this. When we have a thought distortion, thoughts cause feelings, right? It does not have to be real. So let's say I have a thought that I'm afraid to fail. That's just a thought. It doesn't mean I'm a failure. But if I have a thought about it, and then my feeling, that thoughts cause feelings and feelings cause behavior. Now I feel insecure. I feel this lack of confidence. I feel like I'm not worthy enough. And this is all based off of a thought that may not even be true. I'm a fail, like, you know, and then because of what I feel, my behavior then aligns with it. So because I'm a fail, I'm going to just not try, or I'm just going to stay stuck, or I'm not even going to attempt, right? So now my behavior is going to align with the feeling that is directly correlated from a thought that's not even real. So when it comes to violence, for example, or like impulsion, like behaviorals of, oh, okay, I got to pull out this gun and shoot somebody could come from a feeling of, I was just disrespected. That would come from a thought that may not even be real or not. So there's a form of therapy called cognitive behavior therapy that helps with changing the thoughts so that you can get a different feeling, right? And teaching people how to get emotional regulation. That's a very, very important term, because I see so much reactivity, disproportionate reactivity on a daily basis in all types of ways, when I realize, oh, people's nervous systems are activated. And the other thing about that is, like, before all this police murders and things like that, like I keep like trying to look at all of this that's happening from a different perspective, from a clinical perspective too, of even how traumatized these police officers are, that they immediately, anything that happens with people of color, because their thought process is so, indoctrined in this whole idea that Black people are a threat, that they are stopping us. And before they are just looking at the color, and they're already in a threat. They are already in a threat center. That's why they shooting us and killing us, because, oh, I felt that, oh, wait, they was about to go get a gun, or anytime we question anything, threat. And what happens? The impulsion of the violence. And so that's happening systemically with police, because that system is so broken as well, right? But it's also happening with us. So that's how, like, the connection between the behavioral impulsions that come from the psyche. And so that's why I say the brain is the most powerful and the most dangerous tool, the most powerful and the most dangerous. And so you gotta nurture it. You know what I mean? Like, we gotta care for it, because it can destroy us or it can free us.
We've been taught essentially, and Mrs. Crawford, he alluded to this, to accept it. And we found a way to manage it, or just cope with it. For so long, we just deal with stuff. You deal with it. It's a part of life. And is it not true that that's why we have such a breakdown psychologically in our community? Because we haven't sought any help for healing. You just deal with it. And it's layers and layers and layers piled on of baggage, and damage, just breaking us down even more.
I would just like to paint a picture, and it might be a little vivid, in order to get an understanding of how we are affected by our ancestral slave experience. I'm gonna give you an example. Everybody knows during slavery, the master could come to the slave quarters and have his way with either your wife, your daughter, any female that was in that cabin with you. He could come and have his way with any one of them at any time. Now, when that master did that, remember, the male was present when that took place. He could not attack the master because of fear that was put in him from if you go back to the Willie Lynch letter, that fear was embedded in us generation after generation. But check this out. When that male went into the slave quarters amongst the other male slaves and the other members of the slave quarters, whenever a male, he couldn't challenge his master, but when a brother challenged him by just stepping on his feet or looking at him sideways, what you looking at, right? Because he was so demasculated by that act that he had to have somebody who he could demonstrate some masculinity towards. So as I was coming up and we was at a party, you stepped on somebody's shoes, that could start a big fight. Or if you looked at somebody the wrong way, that could get you hurt, or you could hurt somebody. So when we start looking at these the mental aspect of it, the harm that was embedded in us and how we dealt with it. Now you ask the question, this is why I believe the Break and Change the Psychological Slavery Institute is so important, because we have to deal with these issues and we have to be able to learn about these issues so we can get understanding what is the source of these issues. These young brothers out here right now today is killing each other. And if you go back to what I just shared with you, and we were able to show them the source of that masculinity towards each other, it could be the beginning of stopping it. You understand what I'm saying? Because right now they say a lot of these beefs is over, really when you look at it, it's being masculine towards another man or being demasculated And that demasculation is what causing people to become haughty with each other to the point where they hurting each other. So hopefully that says something. But we have to deal with that from a psychological perspective, or it's going to continue from generation to generation to generation.
Is feminization of the Black male a part of PTSS?
Here's a book. This is a book by Wesley Muhammad, and it's called Understanding Assault on Black Men, Black Manhood, and Black Masculinity. I got to go back to racism again. We have to, you just talk about the police officers. You know, a masculine Black man is dangerous in the eyes of white supremacy. So if they can get as many of the demasculation processes that they put in place to occur, in their mind's eyes, we become less threatened. If you look at society as a whole, we have to be very careful because of two things that's taking place simultaneously. If we talking about the Black family, and then we talk about demasculating the Black males and making, I like the audience to know, I'm not talking homophobic or nothing like that. I'm talking about the structure that we need to build up our family structure. And you can't do both at the same time. And one thing I say is this here, we the men have to be able to be an example to our young men. We have to be able to understand the rationality for demasculation of the Black man. And we have to be able to talk to that and talk to it in a manner that you can't build a community. You can't build a family. You can't build what we need to build if we're gonna walk around here making demasculation and all these other things a part of our cultural paradigm.
It's critical right now into the time we live in 2020 to, you know, still dealing with racism, but we oftentimes overlook the own, you know, racism that we have among ourselves.
I just say this, it was 9 of us. We got from light to dark as brothers and sisters. My father was very dark. My mother was a light. So, but we never had an issue with inside of our family.
I've experienced it right within my family. You know, my grandmother growing up, she straight up, she told her girls, never marry a Black man because you have black kids. Her mother told her that. And my grandmother was very, very light, fair complected. Her mother told her that. So this is those things that why, you know, I guess I like to talk about the relationship and the family element has, because it's the things that's passed down that people aren't taking the time to realize this is not right, but they're justifying and thinking because mom, you know, told them, well, my mother always said, and, you know, I have an aunt that she just put so much weight on, you know, what her mother said and told her, but that doesn't mean that what your mother said was right.
And I think you're right about that. That generation were taught to be stoic, and if you have problems, don't talk about it. They're not really into getting counseling. But I think the killing of George Floyd has kind of released something in people where they're now able to talk about it, because a lot of the problems that they are holding back or that they were holding back stem from, I believe, of course, the racism that they've suffered in society. So now that, you know, everybody's saying now we're having a reckoning in this country. We're having a reckoning, and people are getting things off their chests. They're talking about it, and they're understanding a lot of the ways in which they were held back. It wasn't, you know, necessarily because they were inferior, but quite possibly because they were just being held back because of their color. So I think that it's not good that he was killed in the way that he was, but it is something coming out now where I think more people, especially younger people, I think the way they can go out into the, you know, and get involved in protesting and things like that, they can express themselves. But I do think it's an important part for people to get the mental health treatment that they need in order to really bring it out and understand why they act the way they do. Just the way Mr. Crawford talked about, you know, the masculinity, the hypermasculinity that gets them into altercations and unfortunately leads to violence. I'm just wondering, is there any way that we could get masses of people to take the next step and to get at least the idea that they can get, I don't want to call it treatment, because I think that kind of turns people off the way we talk about it. So I'm just wondering, can anybody explain that, the next step that we can move towards? Like Mr. Crawford said, we identified the problem. How can we move towards solving it? Like, how do we tell people that they can get, you know, they can get help?
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually even this morning, I was on a call this morning, a legislative call that I had the honor of viewing, where they are about to turn a law with stricter probation law. So, you know, a bunch of people were on this call this morning to watch this and to advocate for less restriction with some of the probation laws, because they're so inhumane, and making it so that like there's no real rehabilitation for men who are
Right.
or women that are getting out of jail. But anyway, I had the pleasure of listening to several inmates this morning from their prisons advocate for themselves and tell these legislators and the representatives and the senators what they feel like they need program wise. And it was so a lot of like what you guys are saying, and what they were saying was like that rehabilitation does not come from punishment and then more punishment on top of punishment and then more restriction, or then get out and you really can't get a job, but you got to pay these probation fees, and if you don't pay them, then you're going to go back in. But to hear it from them was a wonderful, beautiful experience, because I believe that too. Like one of the things we do with Black Men Hill is like we listen to men, right? Like you have to listen to who you are servicing, right? Or like in order to plan, oh, what should we do about this problem? It's like you have to go to the target and be like, what do you need? And I thought it was a wonderful thing that they were able to say, like, we actually want more programming on education. We want to change our mindsets. Some of the brothers that spoke, and there was also two sisters that spoke as well. They and one of the women that spoke, actually, she wasn't a sister, she was white, but she had life in prison, and she was there advocating for other people who were eligible for parole. But a lot of their perspectives were so interesting. They were saying, we want more education. Like, we come from families and backgrounds where there's so much trauma. They talked about what you said, Stanley, about some of the men told stories about feeling emasculated, and how masculinity in some ways may have even contributed to them even being locked up, right? Or the need to have to fulfill this idea of masculinity. So I just think it's, it was just very powerful, because, I was there as because of our program and what we're trying to develop we want to take our program, Black Men Hill, into the prisons to actually implement the mental health services, the individual therapy, and the space. One of the brothers on the thing said, we need a space where we could be vulnerable. We don't have that. And I was like, wow, that was so powerful. So we're trying to take that program in to service them even before they step out. Like, like if you're doing a needs assessment, setting them up not to fail, because right now the system is setting them up to fail. When they come home and you're hopeless, and you're like, you're being triggered with all of these ways. You can't get a job, you can't, support your family, and then you end up back in the same mindset. And that's what they talked. They were like, we want more programming that's going to help us change our mindset. And to me, what helps change mindset is healing trauma, right? So, I'm all about, I'm a complete nerd when it comes to trauma and the brain and the way it works. But, I just was like, wow, like mental health, people underestimate the power of what it means to change your mental state, right? Because a lot of people are traumatized. We stay stuck in this part of our brain called the amygdala, the fight, flight, or freeze syndrome, right? And that is what I call the trauma brain, or the survival brain. And when we stay stuck in that part of the brain, and the way that works is the trauma brain, the amygdala, like let's say that's my thumb. It's at the base of the brain. And the reason why there's so much reactivity, so much impulsivity, it's like fight, flight, or freeze, right? When you are in survival brain, that's a very important part of our brains, because it is the type that, like, if somebody come in here right now and start shooting, it is the part of our brain that's going to say, get up, run, right? But what happens when it's constantly activated, right? People of color had that part constantly activated. Somebody step on my shoulder, wait, what? You know, you ready to pop off. It's the impulsivity of it. That part of the brain, when we get stuck there at the base, right, we can stay down here. And then the way that the brain works is the neurons of the brain go from the base up to the top. The top of the brain is the cerebral cortex, where rational, reasonable logic decision-making happens. If you're stuck in the base of your brain, of your survival trauma brain, right, and the neurons go up, it gets blocked. So when people are like, oh, that was so stupid, why did that person just shoot somebody over somebody cutting them off, right? Because the part that you need to think about, yeah, I'm mad. We've all been mad in traffic. Oh my God, this a-hole just cut me off, right? But we don't all go and shoot and kill somebody because of it, right? But some people get so stuck in this part of their brain where they're always in threat survival mode. And the reality of it is that that can be cured and that can be healed, right? And then the middle part of the brain, in order for it to go up, it goes from the trauma brain. The middle part is the limbic system. That's the emotional center. The vulnerable piece, right, that we're talking about, that helps you with emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, that also helps you with compassion for other people and having, you know, empathy for other people, right? And then it goes up to the cerebral cortex, decision making, you know, executive decision, executive functioning skills. So yeah, a lot of people are traumatized, a lot of people of color. The more suffering, the more abuse, the more trauma you experience, the more constant trauma without the healing, without understanding the way in which that is affecting your entire brain. You're living in that state, and it affects your health too. Because
Absolutely.
all of this stuff, yeah, it's like dripping chemicals into your body. And that's why a lot of young Black brothers are also dying of health issues. You know, a lot of Black people also, it's all connected. All this stuff is connected. The mental, the physical, the emotional, it's all interconnected. And like you said, we're not doing well. I like what you said. We're not okay.
I'm 8 days away from the 2nd anniversary of the murder of my son. Okay. My son had 5 children by 4 different women. Okay. That wasn't my story. I had one wife and all my children. I had 2 wives, but all my children is from that one mother. My son was street. I wasn't street. I retired from the city of Philadephia, in Army Reserve. I did a lot of things. I was a businessman, had businesses. The question has to be asked as we asking these questions, what is it that is leading our present children astray? That's number one. Number two, there's a lot of elephants in the rooms that's not being dealt with as we deal with the present day problems with our children. We got to remember, we 40 years from the crack era. That's number one.
Yes.
Number two is, and I raised my son from the age of 3. He came to me because his mother was on crack. I got him and I raised him. You know what was missing? No matter what I gave him, something that only his mother could have gave him was that infusement of that emotionality that can come only from the wound that bore him. You understand what I'm saying? Then we have to also look at this here too. Today, when we look at these young people today, when I was coming up, we had Marvin Gaye, Tammy Terrell, and we couldn't wait to fall in love. We had the Whispers, and we had songs that was teaching us how to love a woman. Yeah. Today, these young brothers listen to stuff that call the women everything but the child of God. Also, when you infuse gangster rap into their minds, you infusing subliminal suggestions into the mind of these young children about the negativity of their own selves, and they infuse them with a lot of information that is touching their spirit. And so when we see them acting the way that they're acting today, it was a whole different thing. I was raised in a house with a mother and a father. Everybody knew their role when it came to the stabilization of our household. I had 9 brothers and sisters. So it was a whole lot of us. But at the end of the day, we had a structure that we was raised under that gave us that stability that all my brothers and sisters, by the grace and mercy of God, had some semblance of stability. Now, I gotta remember, I say those of us who think they are the wellest are the sickest. So there is some sickness inside of all of us. But at the end of the day, we looking at a 40-year, this is 2020. When you go to 1980 and you see what happened in this 40-year span, we had to multiply that over those who are what I was experiencing in my generation. So we had to put all of that in a proper context. So as we talking, we're not leaving that elephant in the room out of the discussion.
What do you say to those who say that, you know, this racist idea has been constructed as a way to make excuses for the positions and situations and conditions that Black people put themselves in?
I would say the ones who are saying that haven't been through what we have been through, respectfully, you know, as a whole. Just like Mr. Crawford said, go back from the time he was born, come up 20 years. It's like we keep fighting the same fight. Mm-hmm. And it's exhausting.
Yes.
And yes. It's mentally exhausting.
Yes, it is.
I don't know how much more we can explain of it. I mean, we protest, we try to explain, we wait for somebody to hear and listen, but now it looks like the dialogue is getting flipped back onto rioters, looters, yada, yada. When the main issue that we're putting forth is social justice and, you know, people looking in the mirror and realizing that they're part of the problem and they're not helping. They want everything to just be swept under the rug and no one to talk about it. You know, you all had your protest, you had your time, and now we're going to go back to business as usual. And it's a problem. It's a real problem when you try to bring attention to a problem and people just don't want to hear you. What more can we do?
As a community, as a whole, you know, what things can we put in place to promote healing, you know, to help the Black community?
I'm trying to do, in addition to that, a lot of work around changing, like there's a lot of health disparities that exist for people of color on the medical side and on the mental health side, right? Mm-hmm. And so like Blackman Hill is a program that's built to eliminate the health disparities, right? Because it takes the ways in which it blocks access, limits people's access and opportunities to be able to seek quality mental health care by someone who looks like them, so that they don't have to, you know, finding a therapist is hard. I don't know.
Is that firecrackers?
Like they will be doing firecrackers during the Zoom, right?
I hear it. Wow.
Yeah, I hear it too. And my
see, that's a whole nother discussion of
PTSD. They getting it in right now. But yeah, wait, what was we talking about?
the health disparities.
Oh, the health disparities. Yeah. So I'm doing a lot of work trying to eliminate that. Like our program really like, we also, in addition to giving the men free therapy, we recruit and hire, thank God, we finally at that stage of hire. Before it was volunteer, clinicians of color to provide the services for the men, right? Because finding a therapist is hard. And even if you have insurance or you do have the money to get therapy, you still gonna go through a struggle. Like it's just hard to find people who you feel like can uniquely identify with you. So we've created a whole system that not only matches them up with therapists of color within their own community and takes away these barriers of what perhaps they may not have been able to seek that treatment, but we've come up with a whole entire matching system that ensures you're gonna have a good therapeutic relationship. So we're doing a lot of things to kind of combat the bigger hierarchical mental health system, which isn't working, which is broken, right? Most systems are broken when it comes to us because we don't benefit from most systems. So we created our own system. right? And that's what I think needs to happen. Me, myself personally, I've been extremely traumatized these past couple months, and then to have to be on the front line of helping other people heal and having to make sure that I was okay, and I'm not, and I'm not, I'm still not, right? But what I do know is that, like, I'm no longer thinking, oh, okay, we gotta fight to get them to let us into their system and have us be equal. For myself, I don't think that's going to happen, right? Like, I think in a lot of ways, don't get me wrong, Blackman Hill has received a lot of opportunity since the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. A lot. Major companies and organizations. I mean, more so than what we got from the Breakfast Club. A Black millionaire celebrity and a huge platform like that did not leverage us in the same way as the George Floyd murder. And that is conflicting for me, because I'll do anything for this organization. I love this organization. I think we're doing the most amazing God's work ever. But I knew that a lot of these companies and organizations that were now interested in partnering, it was the result of what you had said, Theresa. It was like, now it's politically correct. We gotta, Black Lives Matter. We gotta be about Black Lives Matter, right? We gotta say, we stand in solidarity with Black organizations. It's like, no, you don't. Now, luckily we partnered with some amazing organizations who did, but I've also said no, thank you, to a couple who did not, to me. Huge places that I know they were probably looking like, wait, you little tiny organization, how are you gonna say no to us? And I'm like, if you are not about the long-term commitment of us and our people, if this is just a result of being able to say, oh, look, we stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, but you really just kind of offering a crumb or doing it for your own publicity, I was like, no, thank you. So I think us as Black people, I think if we were to come together, I believe that Black people are so powerful. We are so powerful if we would come together and create our own systems. Like I think right now I'm in a space where I'm like, I wish we did have a Wakanda, because I would be ready to go and be out. I'm tired of asking people to let us into their system.
That's correct.
And treat us right. I'm over it. I'm like, no, I'm creating my own thing over here. That's where I'm at with it.
From your perspective, Mr. Crawford, as a man, what do you think is necessary for change when it comes to healing, to the topic of healing, particularly as your initiative and your passion, in helping with, crime and unsolved murders?
Since the murder of my son, every time I'm out in the public with other organizations, I'm the only man that's present that's representing the murder family.
It's usually mothers.
Amongst a lot of women. I have talked to brothers that, for whatever reason, act as if that person who was murdered only came through that one female. So there's a lot of brothers, for whatever reason, like haven't been able to come to the forefront and deal with the murder of their child or their family member. And one thing right now that is taking place that is out of the ordinary from when I was coming up, we had trauma, we had gang, but the children and the women was off limits. Now women and children are being murdered at a rate that's
factor.
I mean, that's unbelievable. You understand what I'm saying? But as far as the brothers, I'm hoping that the Black Male Community Council and the work that we're doing and the work that we hope to be able to do is to create a structure within our organization so the brothers can start to talking about the pain and agony of their loved ones being murdered. You see what I'm saying? Because that's a missing piece. Also, what we hope to be able to do is create a vehicle so we can get in the community with the younger brothers. And there's a story about the elders elephants leaving the herd to the younger elephants, and they tore the place up. And once they infused the elephants back in there, everything came back to a balance. So in essence, we have to be able to say, number one, that's our loved ones that's being murdered as Black men, and find ways and means of getting back into the community to help the young brothers find another way. But again, the brothers that had my experience, I agree that we had to find a vehicle that we can talk like Mothers in Charge, Every Murder is Real, and these different organizations that deal with grief. And I know for myself, every now and then, when I can't think about my son for long periods of times. I cannot look at his pictures for long periods of time. Because if it do, it takes me into dark places. I think the psychologists understand what I'm talking about. In these dark places, if I go there too often and I stay there long, I might need the lawyer over there, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult to move about and knowing that somebody killed my son, and that masculinity that we talked about. If I go to them dark places, I might wind up Phoenix or someplace else. So
I have to ask, have you had grief counseling? And at the onset of this, I went to ask, it was a thought in my mind, if the murder of your son had been solved.
Well, they not solved to the point where they locked somebody up for the murder of my son, but it hasn't went through the process for trial because of the COVID, and it's probably going to take a period of time for that to occur anyway.
Okay.
But also within our structure, and here's something else too that most people don't realize. The unsolved murders is such at a higher rate that it's perpetuating murders. Mm-hmm. Because in the city of Philadephia, the solving a murder, the year my son was murdered, it was 351 murders. 60% of them went unsolved. I did a mathematical conservative estimate. At least each one of the murders had at least 100 people, family members, friends, neighbors, that was associated with that person. That's 211 unsolved murders. You multiply that times 100 people, that's 21,100 people right now walking around that don't know who murdered their loved ones. And I could tell from my interaction, we created an organization called the Unsolved Murders, Families of Unsolved Murders Project, where we're going to try to help those family members, number one, bring some closure to their murders, but also by working on that project, we hope to be able to reduce the unsolved murder rate that helps lower the murder rate. So, and to your answer to your question to me, I still have them moments where I'm probably gonna need some treatments somewhere down the line. But I'm
okay, so you have not had grief.
No, counseling. I'm so busy that I ain't had time to get it yet.
No, now, Mr. Crawford, that seems like an excuse to me. But I'm gonna let that go. Ms. Brunson, do you have? I would love your thoughts.
Well, you know what, I always think about younger children and their parents, because like I told Rhonda, you know, I had been doing a lot of work in juvenile court over the past year, and to me, I know kids do things and they get to be a certain age and they'll start following. But the piece that is important to me that you all have mentioned, you Eunice and you Mr. Crawford, the parental, what's going on in the home that is making the child grow up to go a different way in life than what everybody would call the straight and narrow path. And so I would like to see if they could have for real counselors like your organization in the schools, like right there where they are at a young age, so they could learn, you know, what they need to know to become whole adults and whole people in society. I think there's some kind of something that happens at an early age where they become disconnected from understanding that. I mean, and then there's a whole nother piece with the racism piece on top of everything else. So I think it all needs to be addressed early.
In 1980, you had what we call the Reagan administration, the conservative movement came in. And even to this very day, if you and the lawyer probably know, they rescinding most of the gains that we had made under that supposed-to-be civil rights movement. No, and when you talk about the prison industrial complex, we have to look at all of this stuff. Also, we have to look at this here. When they first kidnapped us from Africa and brought us over here, it was for a labor force. Now they just shipped all of the manufactured and everything over to China, these other places. The Mexicans is doing all the farming work, We sitting up here with 40 million strong, and they really don't have no use for us.
The younger generations now, and I do think with the evolution of social media and really just so much building up and reaching a point of being tired, and now you have people like Tasnim, you know, who there's more Blacks who have taken the initiative, you know, to reach out for healing. So there are more people, you know, that Generation Xers and millennials who are now more open to breaking these chains. Is it curable?
This is what I believe. And I pray, my prayers for myself to bring into existence the Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery Institute, because we have to be able to deal with that in order to save our babies in the future. Because if we don't deal with that aspect of the psychological damage of our slave experience as an institution, I'll give you an example. We as for lack of better terms, as African Americans, we have conquered every aspect since we was emancipated. But that's one area that we haven't addressed on the level that we've done these other things. We master sports, we master education, we mastered every field of endeavor since we was free, but we haven't set up something of that nature that deals specifically with the psychological effect of our slave experience.
So are we running from it?
I think most of us not even aware of it to a large degree, because it's not a part of the discussion on that level. We got churches, we got masjids, we got scholarly people, we even got business people that master all of these, but nobody at this point in our existence addressed that aspect of what's in our DNA and what's in our genealogy to be able to help us heal. When there's a mass shooting, they even send the psychologists in to deal with these mass shootings. Now, can you imagine 246 years of intense enslavement, and then in 1865, they say, go and disperse without any treatment for that 246 years of inhumane treatment? That's why I say we are sick people under the illusion that we are well.
Well, when you were asking the question, what came to mind for me is something that I always say, which is that Black pain is often mislabeled as Black strength, or Black strength is often mislabeled as Black pain, right? Is that we have endured so much suffering that, and because we are resilient, which I'm not taking anything away from us as a people, because we are, because if we're here right now in the day, if you're alive, you're resilient, right? If you're a person of color and you are here today, you are resilient, meaning that you have been through suffering.
That's
your family,
right.
Your suffering, your ancestors, you've been through trauma. So we're resilient people, but I think that we kind of glorify Black strength in a way that falsely makes people of color think that you always have to appear strong. And I think that has done a disservice to us when it comes to mental health and psychological mental wellness, because there are so many people of color who that we come from this idea of we can't ask for help, right? Or this idea of shame and stigma around mental illness. Or, I've dealt with so many clients who, they, didn't even know that when I was like, oh, okay, yeah, those symptoms, that's depression. And they were like, what? Depression? I've heard of that before. That's what I got? As if I had given them a cancer diagnosis.
Right.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, it's actually it's very common. 80% of people at some point in their life is going to have it. But here's the thing. It's the most common disease that we all will probably have at some point, but it's also the most curable, you know? So I think, so back to your question, as far as like, is it curable? I mean, I'm in the business of healing, right? I do what I do because I believe that I have a bigger purpose in trying to help people heal. So my answer is always going to be yes, because I have a front row seat to watching people heal and to transform. And that's what I've invested my life into. So I believe yes.
Give me 3 key suggestions that, of what we can do. Where do we start?
Collaborations.
Okay.
I would add to that, understanding our capacity, understanding that we have the capacity. We got to believe that we have We don't need anyone else to do it for us. So that's what I would say.
So, Mr. Crawford, what does reparations look like? What does that mean to you?
So I think reparations is something that we have to demand, because you can't tell people to work for 246 years for nothing, treat them the lowest of the lowest, and then sit back and say, well, how come you ain't like these people, because we didn't have the opportunity, because y'all stole all of our labor, you stole all of our time and energy, and now you telling us to put ourselves by the bootstraps, and we ain't even got no boots.
It's almost like you don't know where to start. Okay, are we going to start with education? Are we going to start with healthcare? Are we going to start with, But I can say this. When I was in law school, I had a constitutional law professor, and I remember having a discussion with him about reparations, because I wanted to know from him, is there some legal way we could bring a suit against the United States for reparations? This was just like the thesis of a paper I wanted to write. And we did figure out, if we could find, a lot of these companies like Wells Fargo and Comcast or whatever, they were other companies before they became what they are today. So if we could trace back to find out what these companies were way back when during slavery, and we could find the oldest African American in the United States, we could start by making that person, or this was the thesis of the paper, bring a lawsuit to show how we were damaged, because that's the person there who was like a direct lineage of a slave.
Like a class action suit.
Exactly. It was a wonderful discussion we had, but I'm just waiting. I know there's a bill, as Mr. Crawford said, in Congress, just languishing, but to me, it's like a lot has to be done for us to be made whole.
All the information discussed can be found on the Like It Is Facebook page. You can watch previous episodes of Like It Is on the YouTube and Facebook page. The show also airs in Philadephia County, Saturdays at 5 p.m. on Comcast channels 66 and 966, and Verizon channels 29 and 30. Again, from myself, I'd like to thank you all. Have a wonderful, fabulous night.
You too.
Love you.
Good night.